Well, hi, Joe. How are you?
Hey, it's good to see you today.
You look nice and warm in that zip up.
I know it is a cold and chilly one today.
It really is. It's been a chilly few days, but not on the chilly side. Last summer, we were in Colorado with the city doing the All America City Award, which is what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, I feel
Which is
very
exciting.
jealous.
I know.
We're doing this kind of short run of 3 kind of focuses on the All-American City. And I was like the only one who didn't get to go to Colorado. So I'm feeling, a little left
Some
out.
type of way
so
about that.
You're going to have to tell me what it was like. What was the whole All-American City thing? And why did you get to go?
Well, you're welcome to go again if you want to write the. No, I'm just kidding.
No, you definitely you earned your way to Colorado.
So like the December timeframe of 2023, Tasha Logan Ford, so our city manager of High Point, approached High Point Discovered about this opportunity called the All America City Award, and it's put on by a group called the National Civic League.
Mm-hmm.
They've been presenting the award since the 40s.
We got it as a city in 1962.
Yes.
I did my homework.
Yes.
Actually, I watched a documentary that Phyllis Bridges
Oh,
put together
that's
called
awesome.
The All-American City that was focused
Oh.
on that 1962 award and the complicated history
Maybe
of
that's
being an
something
All-American
we
city
can,
in the 1960s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have to look that up and link it because that's
Well, you have to go to the High Point Library to
Oh.
find it, but it is at the High Point Library. It's a great
Okay.
documentary. For years, showed it to students at High Point University because it really puts the city in context.
in
But
perspective. Yeah.
anyway, to
Well-
your point, this has been going on a long time.
It has, and really what the National Civic League aims to do, to the best of my knowledge, is really bring together cities from all over the country to talk about how city and city infrastructure and community organizations solve complex problems within a city. And so I think that they've done a really good job of growing and changing, as I'm sure they've changed a lot since the 1960s, to say what are some of those challenges. And they present every year a theme, and they ask cities to present or to provide kind of a look into 3 different projects. Those could be projects done by, the city itself, but they also encourage it to be nonprofits, schools, individuals, initiatives that community members are leading that are helping to solve that problem. Or to rise to that occasion.
Yeah.
So for this past year, 2024, the theme was how cities can improve local democracy through community voices.
Okay.
And so Tasha came to us and said, hey, I think that High Point has done a really good job of this. Let's brainstorm some projects we could submit. So we submitted a written proposal in the beginning of 2024 that highlighted some information about High Point's history and those projects. Yeah. And then we were chosen as a finalist out of, I think, over 500 applicants. And we were able to go to Denver, Colorado and present kind of they said a presentation, but it was not like PowerPoint slides.
Now that I've looked up online and seen, and it's like you hear Mayor Cyril Jefferson's voice booming out over the YouTube video as he's like leading everybody down in the charge, and it was a very creative presentation. Definitely not a boring PowerPoint or TED Talk or something like that.
No, and a lot of the presentations that we watch from past winners, like what they do is they try to tell some kind of story about their community through the way they talk about these. But a lot of them end up being kind of an intro and then people reading off note cards, for 20 minutes.
Right.
And so we worked with the city, myself and our executive director, Amber Williamson, we worked really closely with the city to say, like, what's a creative way to kind of cast this vision? So I won't spoil it. We'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah, go watch
but
it.
I think we did a good job with the creative way, and we were chosen. We were one of the 10 cities in the country that were given this designation for that theme, and I just am so excited to get to explain kind of what those 3 projects were, because what I said when we were on the trip, and Mayor Jefferson said it, Tasha said it, we didn't make these up. Like, we didn't have to scrimp and pinch to find these were things that are actually happening in the city. So it's great that we were rewarded and awarded for that. But as community members, we can also all be part of the things that we talked about. So, yeah.
So we get to learn in this episode, we're talking with the city about their rebranding project. And then we've got an episode on the Greater High Point Food Alliance and the work that they did to build democratic voice throughout the community. And then we have an episode on Thrive and what Thrive has been doing to build that democratic voice, support people, entrepreneurs, small businesses, and lifting up their voices in our community. So I think we've got 3 really good examples of why the city won the award.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's jump into our conversation with City Manager Tasha Logan Ford and Councilman and Mayor Pro Tem Michael Holmes.
Because what we create in High Point
changes the world.
Well, hello, Tasha and Michael. Thank you so much for being here today. We are really excited to have 2 of our city leaders here with us.
Thanks, y'all, for being here.
Absolutely.
So we are coming up on the end of this year of celebrating that High Point has been named an All-America City.
Yes.
Such an exciting accomplishment. And I was fortunate enough to be on the team that went to Denver that got to present our work.
I was the only one that didn't get a ticket to that.
Next time.
And
you could be a taskmaster.
look like you had a good time.
somehow I think you're underselling your role. Like, I think you're burying the lead here.
No. But we wanted to learn a little bit more about what that entailed for our listeners, to kind of hear what that was about and what it means for the city and kind of what that process looked like. So we'll start though with just introductions. I'd love for each of you to introduce yourself and your role with the city.
I'll take that one. Okay. Well, it's a pleasure for us to be able to spend some time talking about our All-America designation. So my name's Tasha Logan Ford. I'm the city manager here in High Point, and I've been manager since 2021. And this really, it's surprising for me, but this is over 20 years in local government. It's gone by fast, but it's been great.
Wow. I'm Michael Holmes, Mayor Pro Tem. I also represent Ward 6, and I was elected in 2019, re-elected in 2023, and it's been a journey since moving to High Point in 2009 and getting involved in local volunteerism, and then ultimately running for council and taking the lead on some of the major policy initiatives that we've accomplished over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
I know the National Civic League creates basically like a theme or kind of a thesis of what they want their cities to be exhibiting that year to receive the designation. And this past year, in 2024, it was strengthening democracy through that local action, local communication. And both of you kind of touched on that, of wanting to make sure people are at the table having those conversations. Even for Ward 6, North High Point, a lot of the times that's felt very segmented or isolated away from High Point proper, right? And you've
even in our language, the way we talk about it, right?
And I've just been so excited to see how High Point is becoming so unified because those voices are coming to the table. So, Tasha, I would love to hear from you kind of what inspired you to want High Point to apply for this, specifically knowing that the theme this past year was that idea of strengthening democracy, what that looks like. It's more than just voting, even though it is that, right? So
Exactly.
I'd love to hear about that.
I came into High Point right as we were launching our new brand. And there was this sense of pride and excitement about, it's something new. And I saw people walking around the city and they had on T-shirts, people were calling, trying to figure out, how do they get plugged in? And when we were out having conversations and our marketing team was out doing having these conversations, people wanted to engage. People wanted to figure out how they get connected. And you didn't feel that sense of division, and that created a level of inspiration. And when I'm always familiar with the American Civic League and these awards, so we look at what their priorities are each year. And I just felt like High Point was well positioned to tell our story in a different way. I think we are in some ways like this hidden gem We talk about the positive things amongst ourselves, and we also talk about the things that we see as challenges that we want to overcome. But what's unique for High Point is we don't just talk about those things. People roll up their sleeves and they're willing to figure out, okay, what's my part and how do I move the needle? And I saw us doing that in so many different spaces and trying to tackle some of our bigger challenges when you talk about, kind of food security, meeting just basic needs in our community. Once those basic needs are met, then you've set the foundation for how you can build and create larger successes. So when I saw all of those things happening and coming together, our team was like, we need to be able to tell this, and we need to be able to communicate it on a larger platform. And that was a lot of the motivation behind why we initially took this idea to our council. I think the other part about it was when you were able to learn from your peers. Part of this is telling your story for your community, but then it also gives you an opportunity to learn from peers, other communities that are facing similar challenges or things that we may face in the future. So you're also building your resources and you're also building connections that you may have to draw upon in the future.
Yeah. I think, to your point, I think for folks who maybe are not familiar with what that entailed, right? Like the National Civic League brings together all of these cities from around the country that have qualified for this opportunity to present. And we had all these round tables and discussions and people led these great conversations around what does that look like? Hey, what's worked for you? What's not worked for you? And even being someone who's not involved directly in city leadership, I was inspired to say, oh, wow, there's people all around the country who care about making sure that their people are heard, that they're taken care of, and that they're set up for success. How can we be one of those lead champions for that? And so, I think it was just so beneficial all around for city leaders and citizens to be able to kind of hear those perspectives,
Certainly.
As someone who did not go to Denver, what? So I assume there's an application, and just what was that like? I guess the process of getting there, and then I don't know what happened in Denver. You said there were like workshops and things. So it's more than just a competition. It seems like collaboration also. Maybe somebody walk me through what happened.
So it starts with us completing an application. So you actually have to submit your projects, and there's a panel that reviews the projects that are submitted. So our internal team, we sat down and we started thinking about, what is the story that we want to tell about High Point, and what are those major initiatives that our community has tackled. And we looked outside of the city because we really wanted to highlight our broader community. What are those tough challenges that we are tackling, and we saw some successes that we were able to see the needle move. And that's how we landed on the 3 projects that we submitted. When we talked about access to fresh, healthy foods, there have been some major movements that this community has taken, and that was not led by the city.
Right.
We realized that those were our citizens that said, this is important to us. We had the voices around the table that were directly impacted, helping to come up with those solutions. And then if there are ways that the city could support it, we stepped in and did that, but that was really led by the community and neighborhoods and citizens themselves. The other piece around supporting our small business ecosystem, we actually started looking at some of the statistics that were coming out from the state of North Carolina. And when we looked at job growth in 2023, it talked about 70% of the job growth in the state of North Carolina was directly attributed to small businesses. And in High Point, we wanted to see that growth continue, but we also wanted to think about how do you create some opportunities for equitable growth among small businesses. Our chamber stepped in. Our nonprofit leaders stepped in, our foundation stepped in and started supporting that initiative, and we wanted to highlight that work as well. And then, that sense of identity of a community, as Michael led our task force, as council invested heavily in, what is our brand, what do we want to be known for, and it really created a sense of synergy and connection. And Michael is our guru on that because that is his baby.
That's
I will
baby.
say
Synergy and connection
is that H. Dot and that has won national awards. So we looked at those 3 projects and we're like, we have a story to tell.
And I think that's exactly the case. It's the story of what we've done over these past few years, right? And there's always this debate about what should government do, how far should government go, and for us to be able to democratize the change in High Point by setting up our nonprofit organizations, by incentivizing our small businesses, by government maybe being the catalyst for things, but then stepping back when the private sector is ready. That's something that I think has gained us the trust of the citizens of High Point. And when we talk about High Point as a maker space, as a creative center, those are the things that we are allowing when it comes to the theme of All American Cities is saving democracy, right? And expanding democracy. It's getting voices that typically have been muted off mute and allow them to speak freely and loudly. And so that's what we've done. And that's one of the things that I think caught the eye of the committee once from the application process, and then certainly during the competition.
Yeah, and I mean, from the perspective of, so High Point Discovered had the opportunity to help with that process of storytelling, which was so fun.
That's right in your lane.
Right. And so, I mean, for me, like when I first sat down with some of the city leaders, I was expecting them to say, here's the 3 things we're doing internally, this is what we want, and they didn't do that. They picked themes and they said, hey, you should talk to so-and-so, so-and-so. And future episodes, we're going to get to talk to those folks who also presented from those perspectives. But I think the main thing that I heard was, as a city, you want to empower the community to actually take action themselves, because you can dole out what you believe is best, but to have those people who say, hey, this is actually impacting me. I'm actually opening a small business. My family's been impacted by food insecurity. They know those challenges and their lived experiences so much more than someone who's, kind of casting that from above. I think with to answer your question about the process, after we did that written application, we actually had to put together that creative side of the story that actually showed who is High Point.
So what did you all present? I mean, other than a sheet of paper, did you have to send other stuff?
Right. So we had to send a lot.
The initial piece was the telling the story,
but it was like census
data. We had to provide
data, storytelling, narrative.
Yep. So just painting a really broad picture of the city of High Point. Historically as well as currently. And then when we were there in person, there was actually kind of jury presentations where you kind of presented a creative presentation that expressed what you did in your project. And so I don't want to spoil it because I want people to see it. So we'll link it in our show notes.
That's the video that we've seen.
Right,
that
because
creative presentation.
There was a lot of element of how do we communicate in creativity, what it looks like for a silenced voice to have that space to speak.
Yeah.
And for the topic of democracy, they made it very clear that the city should not be the one that was driving the message when we did our presentation. So we really thought about those community members that were directly involved in making these things happen and really showcasing their work. So when you actually look at that video of our presentation in Denver, it wasn't necessarily the city being at the forefront. It was those partners that were on the ground that were doing the work. And when we finished our juried presentation, I do remember some of the judges afterwards, they said, it was really interesting to see how you all told the story and you took it from having someone that did not believe, that was really a skeptic and thinking, does this really happen in High Point, to at the end of the story, they could see what was happening, and then that person was completely bought in. And for the judges to be able to comment on that and to be able to see how you took someone that did not believe, was not engaged, did not feel like they were part of the process, observe what was happening, and then find how they could plug in and then start to help. That resonated with the judges, and I think that is very much and very telling of how we try to do things in High Point.
Well, and I mean, again, go watch the video. Because I met Douglas McCollum when he was 17 at High Point Central. And he came into High Point University and was in our Bonner program all the way through, became an AmeriCorps Vista, worked with us there, got his job at the Community Writing Center, working on Washington Street. And all along, I mean, he's a beautiful spoken word poet, incredible thinker and writer. And as I was watching that video, with the power to me, as someone who's known him, is that is so authentic to his experience in the city.
Okay.
And I can see so many other people who I know he has interacted and engaged with, and people that I know that feel that way, that have felt for many years on the outside, not having voice, not having power. And over this kind of last decade, really, when he'd been growing up in the city, like coming to his own professional identity in the city, and just that last 10 years, all of these initiatives have been really intentionally trying to bring those voices to the table. And they're such, I mean, his voice, it's such a creative and powerful voice that who are we as a city if voices like that aren't at the table? And that, so as I was watching that, I was just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think the way we structured our presentation in Denver made it very difficult to pick out who's who, right? So unless we announced our titles when they asked us who we were, it was very difficult to say this is the mayor, this is the council member, this is the city manager, because we wanted to convey the sense that as a unit we move together, right? And so one vision, one mind, and we're moving together in unison. And so I think that was something that really caught the eye of everyone there. And it wasn't just the committee and the judges. We had other cities come to us after and say, my God, we were really impressed with this, and you guys are doing this. And then we had other conversations about things that we didn't even present in Denver. And so we've had conversations and contacts post Denver with cities on other issues that we brought up in conversation. And so it was just a very good learning opportunity and sharing opportunity for the city of High Point. And it was, I think, a really successful trip for us.
We've shared, and Michael, that's a good point. We have been able to share with some of the other cities that were there, things that we're doing around kind of building our infrastructure around economic development. We're talking about how we're addressing some of our mental health challenges with having our mental health team that are now in our libraries, and thinking about how we're addressing the housing needs in our community. But those free exchange of ideas, they're still occurring with some of those cities that were there.
That's awesome. I mean, I've heard from a couple of people who've gone to Denver, some of the community members, that they're still in contact with like organizations in other parts of the country that are trying to do their work. I think that kind of cross collaboration is really cool, especially for community members who often like don't get funded to go on site visits to other cities, and to feel like we're doing things here that really are unique and worthy of other people being like, how did you pull that off? You know, I think we're going to talk to both the Food Alliance and Growing High Point, which are those kinds of initiatives that other communities are like, how did you pull that off?
And make sure they share their statistics and the numbers, because that was moving for the judges to see how much progress has been made. And I think sometimes we may hesitate or shy away from, you know, telling the story or even applying for designations like this, because we haven't completely solved the issue.
Right,
But what this represents for us is that there's movement in the right direction. And I think as a community, as these hard issues come up, we continue to show up at the table with an openness and a willingness to try and figure this out. And we don't have to have all the answers, or the thing doesn't have to be completely solved. But I do think this speaks to our community of how do we continue to show up in this space.
And I think it also shows that we have in our community folks who do have the answers.
Absolutely.
And that it's not all vested in us as the city government. And I think that's the thing that has been the most, I think, inspiring to people is like, hey, what do you mean you want to know what I think about this? What do you mean you want to hear my ideas? You know, we get emails from citizens all the time with ideas on things that they think can make the city better. And the first term, we didn't see a lot of that, right? And so until we really opened up the doors, and I think the branding project really led some of that, because we went far and wide. I mean, we went everywhere in the city. We went into neighborhoods that had never seen, us come into the neighborhoods to really ask them what they wanted. Surveys, thousands of surveys, and I think it really resonated with people like, oh, they're serious.
Yeah.
Like they're serious. They want to know. And we didn't tell them just to tell us how nice we are.
Yes.
Like we asked them for the truth. And so in those types of communications and elevating those voices, we're getting back the data that we need to make significant, sustainable change. And I think that's what people are seeing. And that's why you see people are the connection to our new brand, because it's them, it's their voices. They created this. This wasn't, a bunch of us sitting in a room with some consultants.
Yeah.
It wasn't that. I mean, this was a community brand, and I think that's why it's resonated not just with the people of High Point, but at the state, local, and even international levels. We won awards, and so it's the voice of the people that is represented in this brand.
Well, that's a great segue, because the brand project was one of the things that we presented at All America City. And to me, that one immediately was just like, yes, this is democracy in action, because like you said, your team went into every corner, asked for so many, and I know Ryan Ferguson, the marketing manager at the city, he sent so much data about how many people were involved in those conversations. But I would just love to hear from you, Michael, a little bit about kind of the impetus behind why that rebrand was so needed, and kind of what the that process looked like. I know there were podcasts and roundtables and all kinds of things that I was enjoyed participating in, but if you could just kind of go over that.
Sure. Yeah, it was an early council initiative. It was kind of an idea that came out of one of our strategic retreats, and it kind of floated around for a while before it took root in our one of our committees, and then I was asked to lead it. And so one of the things out of the gate was, hey, this is not going to be your typical marketing rebrand thing. And the reason why that is because when I looked at the brand currently, the brand that we had for so long, I didn't feel a connection to it. I've been in High Point since 2009. I had no connection to our brand. I mean, don't get me wrong, and we have several iterations of who we are as a city. The furniture capital of the world, and High Point's international city. There's so many things that we're branded as, but none of those things have a connectivity to the people of High Point.
Yeah.
And that's what we were seeking.
When was that previous brand made?
It was
was it in the 90s or something?
I think it was.
Oh, yes.
It's been 25. I think 25 plus years since the last time.
I mean, it almost felt nostalgic. You look at it and like, oh, it's like the
vintage
city of my childhood.
Right. And so
it was.
And so there was no connectivity to the brand, to the people. And so High Point at that time was kind of like a Rorschach test, right? It was like how you view it, right? Who you are and your perspective.
What do you see when you look at
What
it?
do you see when you look at High Point? And we knew High Point was so much more. But we wanted to capture all of those different vantage points and bring it together in a brand that spoke with the voice. Because here's the thing, like we could be singing at different pitches, but if you put them together, it's harmony, right? And so I wanted to make sure that we put together a team of city leaders, but people who also understood the democratic nature of how we get voices to the table. And so it was folks from the business community, but we wanted to say, look, we need citizen voices as well, and this is how we crafted the outreach plan. And so for us to put this together and then keep running it back through the cycle, right? We went through several iterations. We had focus groups look at it and listen to it when we were creating the brand narrative, and it just wasn't a one shot. This was a series, and we're still refining it, and it's a working process, which is why I think the HDOT has become kind of that tip of the spear, because it's an open source logo, right? It gives people a chance to put their own stamp on the city logo and see themselves, their organizations, the thing that they're passionate about in the city brand. And we wanted to have that element of it to make sure that folks could find their connection through their vantage point to the city brand. And so when we did it, when it came out, I won't repeat the words that I said, but immediately, that's when everyone knew that it was it. Because the moment I saw it, it was bleep. I was like, oh bleep. That was it. That's when I knew. And so Ryan has he tells that funnily, but But yeah, that's when I knew. And so I think that was a really important process in really not only offering people the chance to lend their voice, but us actually taking that and turning it into something tangible.
And the brand personality pillars, all of those things are so accessible. They're so tangible.
Yeah.
And let me see if I can get them right. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
Okay, so it's that High Point is a movement of makers, that we are inspiring creatives,
Yes.
we are kind and inclusive, and the center of design.
Yep.
Exactly.
That's
And
it.
I was so impressed with the thank you.
I know, right?
Yeah. had to commit them to memory. But I was so impressed that the goal was not to take down any of the things in our city.
No,
It
no,
wasn't
no.
to take away that we're an international
No.
community or we're the center of home furnishings, right? It was actually to elevate everyone to feel that they had equity and accessibility and ownership over those things.
And those things feed right into those brand elements, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, an international city has to be inclusive, right?
Right.
You have to welcome people in from everywhere.
Yeah.
If you're the furniture capital of the world, you have to be a design space. You have to be a maker, have a maker DNA. And I think, who we were feeds into who we are and who we want to become. And so, no, we didn't want to get rid of any of that. As a matter of fact, it was part of our inspiration for the new brand.
It shows how we've evolved.
Absolutely.
Well, it's stated in a way that, as you said, is accessible.
Absolutely.
Right? Like I might not connect with being a furniture capital,
Sure.
but I can connect with a place of creativity and makers and
Yeah.
and that's furniture people, but that's also all of the other people around furniture.
Right.
Like market only happens because you've got great tech people and
Sure.
you've got great contractors and you've got
Who's designing those
Yeah.
spaces
all
in
of that,
between?
all
Yes.
of those pieces, right? They're all creative, they're all makers, they're all doing that work. I thought that was one of the great pieces of that rebrand, which I mean, we talk about it in this kind of marketing brand language, but it really, what struck me is it was really like a city identity. Like who are we?
It's a story. It's just a
Yeah,
story you
it's
tell
much
yourself.
more that
yeah.
than just like, I think some people hear about the city rebrand and they're like, you spent how much money on a logo? It's like,
Yeah.
the logo, as you said, that was the
small
tip of the
piece.
spear.
Small
Like that
piece.
is just a
That
little
is a
piece
small
of
piece.
all of this kind of identity work of
Yeah.
how we're going to engage with our citizens,
'Cause
and how we're going to be a city.
Yeah, and I think folks don't understand that our brand narrative helps to inform how we make policy, how we the businesses that we seek to bring to the city of High Point. I mean, when we think about design and we think about how we incentivize small businesses, those things are going to drive our economy into the future. All of that is encompassed in our brand narrative. When we're talking about makerspace, we certainly want to make things here in High Point. And when we talk about, not to get into the weeds of economics, but when we talk about supply chains and making sure that we have materials and able to service business, if the more of that we're able to do here in High Point and contain that, that's great for our economy and that's great for business.
Well, I think on the economic perspective too, I mean, I just think about how that's going to attract also
Yes.
relocators to the city, right?
It does.
So all of us, for better or for worse, we make decisions based on how we feel a lot of the times
Sure.
about a brand, like that intangible. I hate this word. It's such a Gen Z word of me to use, but like vibe. What is the vibe of this place, right?
No.
Like, what do I feel when I interact with it?
Yeah.
And I think to create this idea that I think you said it, Michael, in one of the task force meetings, like you can make it here.
Yeah.
And I love that because it has
Yeah.
so much double meaning.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can succeed here and
Right.
you can make whatever you're trying to make
Yeah.
here. And Ryan did a great job of saying, that could be a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
That could
Absolutely.
be a computer program. That could just be
Absolutely.
making a family and friends here.
Absolutely.
Like all of those are possible here in High Point because we are a city of unity and community voices.
So much of, I think, the rebrand makes High Point feel very unique, right? But in some sense, every city thinks they're special. But you all were just in Denver with these cities that are trying to, highlight their uniqueness, highlight their distinctiveness. I'm curious, after being there, did you walk away feeling like High Point really is doing something different? Like after seeing all this, was there something that felt unique or special or differentiated High Point in your mind from the other communities that were there?
Aside from not being able to get Michael the Letterman jacket, that
I have not given up on that.
That our counterparts
I
had.
have not given up on it. That is a quest. That is a side quest. I am going to get that. But anyway,
So pulling up to the hotel and the conference space, I will tell you there was a moment there where I felt like we had not done enough because you had cities that came in and they were
marching bands.
They had trailers full of things that they were giving away, and like the band equipments and the youth that were there.
New Orleans,
there were huge
Seattle.
cities that were there. And there's that sense of intimidation, like maybe we didn't do enough to win this and bring it home. But what I will say, it is that one-on-one interaction is the connection, and every team member that went there, if they were asked about any one of our projects, if they were asked about what their involvement was in our projects, they could talk about it, and they could talk about it with a sense of ownership, and they could talk about it from a place where they had a personal story to attach to it. So I think that for High Point, you cannot underestimate that sense of a personal touch, a personal connection, and a personal story. And I think that is what really sets us apart. That came across loud and clear. And I think that collaboration is what is as our chamber director always says, is our president. That's our secret sauce. Is that it's genuine. There's something genuine about what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it in High Point. You can only fake it so much, right? And then the truth comes out. But for us, we presented our truth there, and it was demonstrated time and time again. Don't always have it right every time, but what High Point will continue to do is to figure out, we'll show up, and we're committed to trying to figure it out. And I think that is what came across in our presentation.
I was very confident. I'm not gonna lie.
You were. I was like, so I was the same way. Tasha. We got there and I was like, Seattle. Let's just go.
You're like calling up the Andrews drum line, like we need you.
This is great. You're doing a great job.
I'm a competitor, and like I knew the authenticity that we captured in our presentation was going to resonate. Like I knew it because it was our truth. However, murkier that it was, we put it there and we showed how intently we are moving to address these things, and we showed the progress, and we showed our heart, and we showed how we're transforming the city to be everything that we capture in our brand. And the people that came along were excellent representatives of that. And so once we got everything done, and once we hit those marks and we put it together, I was like, we're gonna get this. Like, we're taking this home. And so, and I just really felt confident in that, because I think the work that we've done as a city and a community really does speak for itself.
When you ask the question of, why now, and why did we, apply for this? As you said, we haven't always been this way. So we wanted to really capitalize on that and share that. And I think that this could, be that moment in time for us, for when we may find ourselves where we're maybe sliding back to some of those old habits. This can be one of those things where it brings to remembrance, we need to make sure that we're working collaboratively and together, because these are the kind of successes that we can have.
Right.
And I think it takes a while for a paradigm to shift, right?
It does.
It takes a consistent push, right? And so for us to not slide back, we have to make sure that this continues to be the way that we work. And so if we do this for the next few years, then it becomes who we are. It becomes, we evolve to that, right? And so I think that's what all of us are pushing for. And this is, I think, the council, I think the community, we're all pushing in the same direction, because we've seen how successful this model is for us. We've seen how we've worked in the past hasn't yielded us the type of fruit that we want, and this has in a shorter period of time, with coming through a lot greater challenges. And so I think this evolution of High Point I think everyone sees this is who we need to be in order to continue to push forward. And I think as we start to look around, we hear the voices in the state from some of our larger cities like, hey, High Point, you guys are really moving up there. And so that's very different from the narrative that has been for the past couple of decades about High Point. And so I think that speaks volumes on why we should continue and why we should continue to push and move in this direction.
Hannah, you made a comment a moment ago where you were talking about our partnership and how we reached out to High Point Discover to help us with this. It does also require a high level of trust among the partners that are at the table, and I think it also requires a sense of kind of laying that pride aside. Our team a lot internally, and I will say our team from our management team, we'll have conversations around, let's set ourselves aside. Who else needs to be here with us to help move this? I don't necessarily care who gets the credit, whose name is on it, but I want the city to be successful. And that requires, especially as a manager who you're responsible for controlling so much, that you have to take your hands off of things sometime and figure out who else do you need to have there to help you work through things. And even when making the decision to reach out to High Point Discovered was, who is the best person to tell the story? Who has the pulse of what our businesses are doing, what our community is doing, and can tell that story in a way that resonates with people? It was a partner that was there.
Absolutely.
Who are those voices that need to be the ones talking about the work that was done in community? Having our youth that were there and being able to experience that with us. And we changed parts of that presentation to say, they need to have more of a voice in this.
Absolutely.
And no one was like, what? Everybody was like, okay, they can have my part, they can take this part, so that we could really elevate those voices. But there wasn't that sense of, it's got to be mine.
No,
or
none of that.
And all of us were like, who needs to be there?
To your point, I think you said that it was hard to differentiate because we all had on the same shirt, right? We all had on H. What we create in High Point changes the world.
That's right.
And so it was like, no matter if you are a student who's here or if you're the city manager, you're wearing that logo, you're saying this is still my High Point story. And I think that was so impactful to just see that visualize. There's a level of trust in the city that we understand that we all care about High Point together.
That's the word. Trust is the word. And I think that's what we wanted to capture. We wanted to capture that we trust all the sectors of our city to come together, to work collaboratively, right? And so we hit every aspect, right? We hit small business, we hit equity, we hit nonprofits, we hit city government, we hit our artist community. We had all of that encompassed in our presentation. And this ecosystem that we call a city, everyone has to have a space to grow and to thrive. And for those who haven't had the ability to create that space, the other elements in the city have to be willing to sacrifice some of the things that they've had historically to give people that space. And I think we finally have the commonality of purpose as a city to do those things. And which is why it came across so perfectly in Denver, is because I think this is who the city is becoming. I think this is who we are now, is that we're willing to look at other spaces in our city and saying, hey, we've got to improve there. Like we've got to go to Washington Street and we've got to revitalize that. Like we've got to go to the Southwest Corridor. We've got to do these things. And so it's not just something that we think about. It's really a mandate for us now. It's because I think that's the difference in the purpose of the city than what we've had prior decades.
So we have this designation now.
Yeah.
What does that mean? I mean, for us as a city, like all of this work, all this time, all this creativity that went into it, what do you think the meaning, the impact of having that award is for us?
I go back to something that, Michael, you said early on when we were talking about the brand, where you said, kind of that brand was just kind of the tip of the iceberg. So I think for me, when I think about this designation, yes, you get to wear a pin. Yes, we get to wear flags. Yes, you get to put this on your website. But I feel like that is just the tip of the iceberg, because what it really represents is a new way of how we want to do business here. The designation represents how a philosophy for us and how we want to do business. When you think about from our economic development perspective, if a company is looking at High Point and they're coming to the city, we're immediately thinking about who else do we need to engage at the table? What is it going to take for this company to be successful? How do we tie them into making sure they have access to a qualified and competent workforce? And it's not that we feel like we have to do all these things on our own, but we're connecting them with the experts that can help them be successful. And it creates that space where people feel like, okay, I can move and find what I need and position myself to make it here in High Point. So I feel like more than anything, it represents our new way of thinking. It represents our philosophy and how we're going to think. For lack of better words, kind of a core value and a principle for us.
Yeah.
Well, you articulated earlier a kind of how it can hold us accountable.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Too.
Yeah. It's a new standard.
Yeah.
It's a new standard, and I think internally it means so much because there are always going to be negatives that you can highlight about your city. Yeah. There's always going to be something.
Well, there'll always be critics.
There's always going to be critics.
In everything that you
do.
In
the video.
In everything that you do. Yeah. And I think from a point of pride, that collaboratively folks came together to capture something for the city of High Point. And that shows that we can actually do this, that folks recognize the work that we're doing and how important it is, and that we're solving some of the big problems. Have we completely solved them? No.
Yeah.
But we're taking on problems that have existed in our city. And I think when I see people who are walking around in our branded apparel, like how often did you ever see someone walking around if they didn't work for the city with a city logo on them? And now you see kids with our mosaic on there. We see pets, with the little neckerchief.
So do you have a holiday shop open
for
shopping?
Trust me, it's coming. It's on the way.
Do we need a link to the website?
No, but when you see that and you see people who are buying in to the new to what High Point's promise can be, I think that internally, that's just one more thing, one more level of a standard that we're setting for people to realize that High Point can live up to its name and be the highest point in this state.
Oh, I like what you did.
And one of the books that our department heads that we read is Admiral McRaven. It's one of his books, but one of the lines in there, it talks about hope is not a strategy, right? Hope, however, has to be there because that is that expectation you have of what can be. But all the things that you put in place, that becomes a strategy. So when I think about, what does this mean for us? Our strategy means that we're going to have different voices at the table. Our strategy means that the person that may be closest to the issue, we want to be able to talk to them to understand what that experience looks like. Our strategy means that if an idea comes into us and it might not necessarily fall directly under the purview of the city, that means that I have a responsibility to share that with the person who is or may be better able and positioned to be able to meet that need. So hope is important for us because I think that gives us that aspirational push of we can do this. Yeah. But then you have to figure out, okay, what is that strategy? To me, we have a new strategy for moving forward.
Yeah.
Well, as we kind of wrap up, I would love to hear from both of you. What are you most hopeful about for the future of High Point? Even if that's not the strategic side, what are you looking forward to seeing in the next 5-10 years in the city?
I'll defer to my elected official on that
one. I'm
Mayor Pro Tem.
I am really excited about and hopeful about the growth in some of our areas that have traditionally struggled.
Yeah.
Like I feel like there's been seeds that have been planted that if properly cultivated will grow. And I think we have been intentional about that, and I think that is something that I am extremely excited about. Just to, if I wanted to give a plug to my district, I mean, we have a great kind of growth mentality there. And I'm really hopeful that we're going to continue to expand. But my goal this council, this term, is to connect our city. I don't want folks to feel like they're in another city when they go to North High Point. I want, and I've been encouraged by that. I've seen some of my neighbors downtown at events, at the food hall, and that's something that I've encouraged. I want people to feel like there's an opportunity that they're welcome every place in the city.
Yeah.
That you can go to North High Point and shop, and you can come down instead of going to Winston or going to Greensboro. Not that, we love our sister cities, but we have what we need here.
Yeah, we want them to think of the downtown as their downtown.
Absolutely, and we want people to take ownership of that. And from what I've seen over the last 2 years, it's given me hope that that's going to happen. So I'm looking forward to that.
That's awesome. I love that.
And I will say for me is I want to make sure that as a city, we continue to lay the foundation to position ourselves for long-term success. There are decisions that were made, kind of 20 years ago, whether it was kind of a strategic purchase or where we might not have been able to do things now. Like when I think about the extension of Salmon Drive, there were some investments in property. There was a foundation that was laid there. We're just now realizing that 20 years later, but what is it going to mean to the future development and then our kind of the economic growth of our tax base here in High Point? And as we continue to see that tax base grow, we can continue to reinvest in this community. So for us, I want to make sure that we continue to have those collaborative conversations and that we don't shy away from those big things or those big investments that we need to make sure that we're positioning our city for long-term success. When I think about my son being able to be successful here when he's an adult, what is he going to need in this community to make that happen and to thrive?
Yeah, I just if I could tag one extra thing on that, it's just it's a big picture mentality.
Yes.
It's a big picture mentality. Like when we put forward a comprehensive plan, a 20-year comprehensive plan, that's not an election cycle.
Exactly.
That's decades. And so that will be the thing that allows her son and my daughters to potentially raise families, start business, do the things here, because we're laying the foundation now. What is the saying that great people plant seeds of trees under the shade of which they will never sit?
That's right.
And so I think that's what we're doing now. We may not see all that High Point becomes, but we're planting the seeds of that right now.
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. Great note to end on.
Yeah, thank you all so much
course.
for everything that you're
Enjoyed it.
doing, your lives of service to the city, to the residents, this designation, all the work that went into it. Just thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys.
Thank you guys.
Well, that was great. Well,
Yeah.
I learned a lot more about city rebranding than I thought I'd ever know.
Yeah, and just in general, how much city leadership works hard to hear those community voices and to make sure that we all feel a sense of ownership over the city of High Point. They did such a good job with that. And we, shameless plug, we actually sat down with Michael as well as Ryan Ferguson, who's the marketing manager for the city of High Point, last year to talk about what that brand looks like. So you can read that below in our show notes on our blog.
And you've all also done some merch too.
Yes. So
collaboration with the city.
Yeah. So if you want to rep the new H. logo, as well as some of those kind of fun taglines. So we've got one that says we're the center of the creative revolution, and we've got one that says what we create in High Point changes the world. So both of those are available on the High Point Discovered shop. So head over there if you want to represent what we all were part of.
Awesome. Well, this was great conversation, and join us for the second part of our series on the All-American City.
Yeah. Thank you to our guests at the city. Thank you, Joe, for being here as always. And thank you to our technical producers at Captivate Media. We'll see you next time.